Satoshi Kanazawa is no stranger to controversy. Currently reader in management at the London School of Economics, he uses evolutionary psychology to analyze social sciences such as sociology, economics, and anthropology. His work within the ever-restrictive lens in which institutions of higher learning has been criticized by many as being politically incorrect, and he himself explains that censorship within academia is stifling truth in the name of feelings. In fact, he has stated that his paper, "No, It Ain't Gonna Be Like That," published in Evolutionary Psychology, that the real threat to the intellectual honesty and integrity of his particular field, and this can be expanded to all disciplines in the social and even hard sciences now, as well as society in general, that the real threat comes from not fundamentalist Christians, but from the political correctness in the ivy-covered buildings of our own campuses.
Call the police!
Rebutting Jeffrey Miller of the University of New Mexico's paper, The Asian Future of Evolutionary Psychology, Kanagawa stated that for cultural, social, and institutional reasons, Asians cannot make original contributions to basic science, and that he doubted Miller's prediction for the Asian future of evolutionary psychology, and that future will continue to be in the United States and Europe. Kanazawa points out that while Miller is correct to point out that East Asians have a higher mean IQ than Europeans, he explains that East Asians have not been able to make creative use of this intelligence. While they are very good at absorbing existing knowledge via rote memory, hence their high standardized test scores in math and science, or adapt and modify existing technology, hence their engineering achievements, they have not been able to make original contributions to basic science. He presents the statistics for Nobel Prize recipients from 1901 to 2005 by country, and then breaks them down by nations and finally by the relative representation of each nation's population in the world. He notes the massive overrepresentation of the Euro-American nations. He also notes the underrepresentation of East Asian recipients. Even the number one country represented in Asia, Japan, which he also notes has been a major geopolitical and economic power for most of the 20th century, is still, as a percent of its population, underrepresented. Kanazawa highlights many previous studies that point to what has long been known to East Asian specialists as the creativity problem. He also highlights studies that suggest that the ideographic nature of written Japanese and Chinese languages curb abstract thinking and creativity among Asians, and still other studies that point out that Asian cultures, religions, and educational systems devalue and discourage logical thinking. He comes to the conclusion that some combination of cultural, social, and institutional factors combine to stifle basic science in Asia, and that science is not a democracy. It is inherently elitist. A nation does not dominate science by having a large number of people, but by having good ideas. And there appears to be a dearth of good original scientific ideas in Asia in the last century. Having lived in several East Asian countries and currently calling Tokyo my home, I can clearly agree with Kanazawa that one of the real problems for East Asians and independent thinking is the conformist nature of the culture in this part of the world. Kanazawa surmises that part of the reason why Asians living in East Asia and imbibing the culture cannot think outside the box and make original and creative contributions to science is because they are too conformist, and that academic conservatism is actually a fatal obstacle to it. He clearly states that scientific revolutions, and I would add social revolutions, happen by challenging the established paradigms. He stresses that no conformists have ever brought about a scientific revolution, and now this same conformist nature as seen in East Asia to what is and is not acceptable thought and discourse has crept into Western academia, And this ideology is now attempting to quash all thoughts, facts, and conclusions that do not comport with the dogma and tenets of radical social justice and radical feminism. To be transparent, I do like Kanazawa, even if I don't agree with him all the time, as he pushes all of the buttons on topics and ideas that 50 years of social engineering via the media and institutions have attempted to make taboo. The entire point of institutions of higher learning is for the free flow of ideas, not for safe spaces and deplatforming those with whom which you disagree, as is the current state of affairs in the current year. In that, what I see is a convergence of Asian and Western uniformity and conformity of thought, just in different ways. Many, if not a majority, of our centers of learning from kindergarten all the way up have become nothing more than a joke and a center from which to indoctrinate those too young to know better. Now, books and words and visiting speakers are seen as dangerous and even as forms of violence. Trigger warnings and safe spaces are necessary to protect the fragile young people now from ideas. From the infamous Evergreen College in Washington State to the radicalized campuses of the University of California system, schools, like the corporate world, have become a hostile and intolerant environment for diverse viewpoints. Students become fearful of expressing unpopular opinions out of concern that their classmates and sometimes even their faculty will shun and verbally harass them, and in many cases physically attack them, and this also extends to certain heretic faculty as well. Such a culture is incompatible with intellectual diversity, and since many conservative ideas and speakers are labeled as threatening and banned from campuses and the curriculum, students who question the dominant political ethos and narrative are worn down by hostile reactions in the classroom. In fact, when summarizing the new conformist nature at the centers of higher learning in the Western world, Kanazawa, speaking on behalf of scholars in the pursuit of truth rather than social justice, said that their enemies were not fundamentalist Christians. They were instead our university's colleagues in the women and cultural studies departments. He said that our true obstacle is not the Christian fundamentalism in the wheat fields of Kansas, it is the political correctness in the ivy-covered buildings on our own campuses. The feminists and social constructionists, all of whom have PhDs and no problem with the theory of evolution by natural selection as long as it is not applied to the human brain, are in a position to do far greater damage to our science than Christian fundamentalists. Really, he went on, what can Christian fundamentalists do to us? Refuse to pump our gas, spit in our Big Macs? In contrast, our politically correct feminist and social constructionalist colleagues control our recruitment, tenure, and promotion processes, and influence our research funding. It is the cultural insanity of political correctness. That is the true enemy we must fight. Kanazawa's fears are echoed by social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who has warned against what might happen if a university's main objective becomes social justice rather than the pursuit of truth and knowledge, as motivated scholarship often propagates pleasing falsehoods that cannot be removed from circulation even after they are debunked. In Haidt's own view, our species evolved for tribal conflict. Along the way, we learned a neat trick: our ability to forge a team by circling around sacred objects and principles. Academics have traditionally circled around truth, at least in the 20th century, and always not perfectly. But it would appear that in the 21st century, they are increasingly circling around victim groups. And this new secular form of worship of victims has intersected with our sociological trends to give rise to a culture of victimhood on many campuses across the Western world. And the new tribe of victims and their self-appointed protectors are not interested in truth, only victimhood, and that some ideas are blasphemous, and that bad ideas are no longer to be refuted, but people that propose them are to be punished. Thus, many of the most powerful explanatory tools that science and social science have are simply banned in order to promote a culture of self-censorship fueled by a constant fear of offending certain people. I think it's clear that no university can claim to have truth as its central goal while at the same time espousing social justice as their motto. Kanazawa is right. The biggest threat to truth, the biggest threat to diversity of thought is coming from those that do not seek equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome. And if discourse, inquiry, and even things as fundamental as freedom of speech are going to survive in the West, these peddlers of radical and failed ideologies need to be countered at every turn. More on Kanazawa's interesting scholarship in the months to come. Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of material, please consider subscribing. And if you do, click the alert bell so you cannot be unsubscribed and actually get notifications from YouTube about new video uploads. And also follow me on the usual social media. Till next time.